not have a student rep this evening, as stated on the agenda, so we will move on to the old business, and we will be discussing the draft of the HWRSD calendar for the 2025-26 school year.
So I think the calendar speaks for itself. It's the same format that we've used for many years, including the current school year, and the draft, or no longer draft, but the calendar that was just approved for 24-25. So this is taking it forward one more year, 25-26. We did try to take into account the feedback we'd gotten on the 24-25 calendar when designing this one. And it is also being reviewed by the HWEA right now for compliance with the contract.
Is the hot pink and red, is that PD?
Yes, if you look at the notations to the side, 25, 26, 27 are all professional learning, and then the first day of school would be the 28th. August of 25.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. We will move on to public comment. Is anyone here interested in making a public comment? And Aaron, did anyone sign up online? Okay, great. So we will move on to subcommittee updates. We will begin with the curriculum subcommittee. Lisa?
Our plan is to meet the first week in November before our school committee meeting. That's it for open. That's it.
Great. Okay. We will move on to the planning committee. You guys all set? So planning committee, so we met on Tuesday. We discussed the alleviating the crowding at Wilbraham Middle School, and some options that we discussed was, the first one was keeping the 6th grade at Green Meadows and not allowing transfers. Wilbraham Middle School will need a reduction of a minimum of 50 students to make a difference. Another option was demoing and remodeling the locker room space at Wilbraham Middle School, and this would create additional classroom space. The one thought in doing so is that there are no windows in that space. Another option was putting up better walls in the library at Wilbraham Middle School. Currently it's used for 3 different classes at one time. Another option was creating a special academy, an 8th grade academy, or a STEM academy, which would be held elsewhere, and that would alleviate crowding. And this would also need a minimum of 50 students to make a difference. And they would split the day between Wilbraham Middle School and this other location, similar to like the way C-Tech works at the high school. And then we did have a brief discussion on modular classrooms, and we were talking about whether or not that should be explored. And that wasn't really considered in our discussion as an option, because most of the structures are considered permanent structures with permanent modular classrooms. And then we also discussed bargaining issues related to reorganization, and I will turn that portion to John.
I have a question. On the middle school library, what is it? On the middle school library, I'm just wondering what the plan is going forward over the next few years. Are we going to have a library back again in robust fashion? Are we going to have little compartments in the library? What's going on?
My hope would be to use the reopening of the middle school library as one of the parts of rebranding the middle school and its next iteration. You know, the library has gotten to a point where it's hard to call it a library. You know, there really isn't a place where students can go and seek out any type of literature or do any type of research. I will share that the idea of building more permanent walls is a little bit of a concern to me, although it would help, because that is, more stuff that would then have to be demoed out of there in order to achieve that goal. But I think that one of the things that we should think about in the whole reorganization is funding for the reestablishment of the middle school library. And I had mentioned to Aaron after we had presented the financial analysis that I think one of the things we made as a mistake in our haste to get things done was not put funds in for the creation of the library. But I have been a part of 3 library remodeling projects in my time, and I've seen how it can really be a way for a district and parent groups to work together to really build school pride. And so my hope would be that we reopen that library, not to the state it was before, but as a new, modern, 21st century library media center.
Even better, yeah. Michelle, one other quick point. There was another option that we did talk about. Is it okay if I bring that one up?
Sure.
So we were brainstorming, what can we do to alleviate? And there were actually 2 other options that were brought up, right? One was to do nothing, to let it run the way it is, this year, and to have it run that way one more year. And the other option was to look into maybe in 2024, at least, if legally we can do it and stuff like that, have the 8th graders that now presently are at WMS, have them come here. Whether that's feasible, doable, or even prudent, that's a whole nother issue. But I said, I just at least think that should be on the table for all of us to discuss, because hopefully, if we have a little discussion about this, and we can see which way the school committee's leaning, then John and Aaron have their marching orders on really what really to deep dive into. Not all of them, but which ones we think are the most expeditious. Yeah, cool.
And then just to speak to the contractual issues, I had shared with the planning committee that the HWEA had approached me informally to say that they have an interest in beginning negotiations on any issues that need to be bargained about moving the 8th grade to the high school. Certainly those issues haven't even been identified or shared yet, but the desire would be to try to conclude any negotiations of issues that need to be incorporated into an agreement before the beginning of next year, because next year is contract negotiation year. And the thought is that even if 8th grade doesn't go there next year, if we can figure out all the things that will need to be reflected in the contract so that it can just slide into a successor agreement, that it would be helpful to have that done ahead of time instead of trying to figure all of that out while also doing the typical types of contract negotiations.
I make a motion to begin discussion of potential bargainable issues related to district reorganization with the HWEA.
Second.
Are there any questions, or is there any discussion?
I got to say that how things went last time, 2 years ago or so, when we negotiated, I thought that went swimmingly. So if we could, start this much earlier, get everything out on the table, I think that would be brilliant.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so motion carries 5-0. 5-0. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions about any of the other conversations at the planning committee meeting?
Yeah, what do you think about the options that we put out there? We would just really, if you have another idea, if you're like, oh wait, we could do this and this, confining Hamden kids to have an elementary 6th grade experience as opposed to a middle school 6th grade experience. I don't like that idea. I think that's just doing a disservice to our, brothers and sisters, our family in Hamden, and the students. The second one, which was the, what order did you have? What was the second one?
The second one was remodeling the locker room.
Yeah, remodeling the locker room. I guess, no one takes showers in middle school anymore. Wish that was the case when I was in middle school. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can, regardless, I think that's something that should be on the project. There should be a project for us to do. Whether that can be done in time and correctly for 2024, that's a whole another issue. And the third one.
Before you go on to the third one, the remodeling of the showers, if I remember rightly, the showers were in the basement above the academic 7th grade, and there
No,
is a...
Cheryl, I don't think so.
Are you talking about the Wilbraham Middle School?
Right.
Yeah, there has been a water issue and a mold issue. So whatever we do to the downstairs, it's going to be costly.
Is it, I thought it was
It's on the first level.
on the first level. Oh, that's what you're talking about, because there's a level above it?
Yes,
Oh, I got you. I understand. I'm sorry.
so it's just something to be aware of.
Copy. Thank you, Cheryl.
So, yes, the comment or thoughts. I guess I have some concerns and apprehension listening to different ideas about demoing and renovating in the Wilbraham Middle School when it's not for the implementation of the final plan and reorganization. I'm concerned about wasting money that we maybe don't have on projects that might have to be undone, like we talked about more permanent walls. Perhaps they're so expensive, but if we're talking temporary stopgaps, it would seem that the most straightforward thing would be to not be doing a bunch of construction within the buildings, but to be setting up modular classrooms. They're available for lease, they can be a finite period of time, and I presume that you don't have to buy them, although I don't know that. I'm not an expert. I'm not a dealer in them, and perhaps they're so ridiculously expensive we can't consider them. But it would seem to me to be much more straightforward that if we're talking about a one-year stopgap, hopefully a one-year stopgap, could be longer depending on how things go. Right? We have to be reminded that it would be straightforward to bring in modular classrooms, provide the good, appropriate learning space for the students for the year, without having to move kids around from where they are. The middle school can be a middle school, and Stony Hill can be Stony Hill, and anyway, that's kind of my initial thoughts, and listening to what you guys are hearing. I know I didn't hear I wasn't at the planning meeting, so I didn't hear the whole discussion and everything, but that's my thought.
Yeah, I think the bathroom, changing the bathrooms over to classrooms, that would be something that would be long-term, and that would be something that they could use in the long term. I mean, because right now it's just space that's just not being used in, like Cheryl says, whatever, leakage, old pipes just rotting there, causing mold issues, stuff like that. It seems like it's something that we should eventually, do something about anyway. So that, if we did do something like that, that would be something that would be used, forever.
Yeah, and my
Yeah,
caveat is that what I meant was that maybe they've already mitigated the mold, but because it has been built on a swamp and wetlands, the mold will come back if it's used in a wet way, such as bathrooms and showers.
And I'm concerned that project, which I agree might be a good project, but there'll be no windows.
Yep.
So we need to look into, if it's one floor there, putting in skylights at least for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then, now we're talking about a pretty major renovation project that, there's not a budget line for, the soonest possible time there could be funding obtained for that would be at the town meeting in May.
Right.
And it might not be for a year after that. So it doesn't seem to me to be something that's feasible for a one-year stopgap, even though I completely agree. There's a very good likelihood that's going to be part of the reorganization.
Even if we put the gas on it, right? Even if we put the gas and we really push this through, there's no one going to be ready for 2024. And then, the fourth option being permanent library walls, exactly what John had just said. we're gonna put those walls up for a year and then take them down because we wanna have a robust library. You know, so that would just be throwing good money after bad, right? Whatever the expression is. And then the next one, I do like the ideas of the modulars, depending on the pricing. And just to reiterate this to everybody, back in the day, the modulars were like a construction site trailer that they would just drop there, and then it was just a space with like a roof, maybe a space heater. The ones that they have now are full and complete technological classrooms with its own internet, with its own power, with its own water. I mean, I believe some of them have bathrooms, stuff like that. It's just like a full, complete school, technology and everything. And it's not to be compared to these, you know, like construction site trailers. And to the point when we were talking at the planning meeting, someone had said that they only knew of that. I think, John, maybe this was you, that they were only like, they were more permanent, like instead of constructions, instead of saying, hey, we want to add a couple of, we want to add this wing, add a couple of classrooms. You get these modulars in there and they become permanent structures. They'll be there for 20 years or so or whatever. So I don't know if there are leasable options and what the leasing prices would be, but if you could find out more, that seems to be the one that's most feasible, because the other two was do nothing. Well, that's what we did that now. And the last one was moving the whole middle school to the high school in 2024. But I just think that with everything that has to be done to make that happen, a smoother transition. This was the general consensus of the committee. Michelle, you can edit me if I didn't say it correctly, that really the time would be needed. And the reason why it's being pushed off to 2025 mostly is for the middle school.
There were a few, I'm not sure if we had any sort of deliberation on 6th grade at Green Meadows not transferring to Wilbraham Middle School. So it looks like as of October 1st of this year, the current 5th grade, which would be 6th graders next year, they have 36 students in the class, so that would, right, but it gets you closer to that number. So that is also another option. And then the 8th grade academy or STEM academy, which would be 50 students as well. We also discussed other things. These were just some, options for alleviating some of the overcrowding, but other things that we had talked about as a planning committee, which was, bringing all of the pre-K to Green Meadows, right, which is something that it sounded reasonable, a reasonable option, and something that is outside of the regional agreement at this time, and something that would be doable for the 24-25 school year.
And the reason we would do that is to alleviate the overcrowding
At Mile Tree.
Yeah.
Because there's still, we talk a lot about the middle school, which is a problem, but, there are other buildings in our district that are experiencing overcrowding, Mile Tree being one, Stony Hill being the other, so we're looking at, alleviating overcrowding in all buildings. It just so happens that there seems to be more options at Wilbraham Middle and more overcrowding there.
So just to address a few of the things that were part of that conversation, I had heard some concerns about potential air quality issues at the middle school earlier this year, and so I ordered a comprehensive environmental analysis to be done there. We got the results earlier this week, and they showed that there was no amplification of mold within the building. In other words, the naturally occurring mold spores in fresh air were higher than they were in the building. So I do believe whatever issues existed in the past have been mitigated. But I haven't also studied what it would take to demo the locker rooms or what potential issues might be involved with that. But I just wanted to and I have shared that with the faculty and staff. So, and I'll share it now with the public since that has been put out there. I do think that that's not an issue currently at the middle school. I also
Excuse me,
wanted,
John, could you put that report up online?
Sure,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
The other, another part of the conversation that I'd like to have with respect to preschool is full-day option, which was part of the packet that Aaron had presented. Some of the feedback we've received in our community discussions over the summer were that for a half day, it is a hardship to have one district preschool. Most of the parents would be coming from Wilbraham based on the breakdown of the population, and they'd be dropping students off and then returning to get them very shortly thereafter in a half-day model. So if we do that, I hope it can also be the direction of the committee that we put the full day in the budget, because I think that is kind of a necessary component in order to make pre-K work politically, and I also think it's one of the best things we can do for our kids. And the last piece is I do want to say that I did do a little bit of research on modular after the planning committee meeting. It is possible to do leasing. The cost to lease a 14 by 70 classroom for a year, just according to the one site that I was looking at, is about $295,000, which is a substantial fraction of the cost of just purchasing one. And it's to your point. The modular construction of today is not like it was in the past, where you had a parking lot and someone towed up a classroom and then drove away and picked it up at the end of the year. Now you're talking about site preparation, you have to pour slab, these things go on concrete, and even if you say, okay, I only need it for a year, you can take it away, then you're still left with, okay, you've leveled the place, you have concrete slab, and I guess you could make it a basketball court, you know, but I wonder about the wisdom of renting. If it's going to be that much, it might be a better option just to buy and permanently have that space available for the district.
That would be a better option, I think, for Stony Hill, because we're always going to have two classes at Stony Hill, and having a classroom or two outside permanently might help with the issue there. But that's all I know.
I'm still interested in the modular classrooms. I know that there is a network in New England where districts that no longer need their modular classrooms donate them to other districts. So I'm interested in knowing about that. And then if it could be something, just putting it in there to see what districts are donating the modular classrooms that they don't need anymore. Because I've been and donated modular classrooms before. And then maybe flipping around, maybe a little flip to like, depending on pricing, maybe the library is what the new library is a modular classroom while the other stuff is remodeled. You get what I mean? Like I've been in modular libraries too.
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with that program. If you could send me some information, we could definitely check it out.
Awesome, thank you.
So does anyone else have anything to add? Okay, I believe our next planning meeting is November 20th at 5:30 at the IRC. What was it? The 21st, November 21st. 5:30 in the IRC. Okay, thank you. Moving on, we will move to the Finance and Operations Subcommittee. Sean?
So we had an interesting meeting. We started with a couple of the things that the administration has done in the past week to save money, and John and Aaron are working on a list which we will be presenting at the beginning of each of these meetings so everyone can see, you know, this growing list each time of the things that we're doing to be fiscally responsible with the money that the towns give us. And then we went into a conversation about the idea was put forth by Mark Ducey and Doug Boyd, right, from Hamden Advisory, where they said they would work to do something where the towns would have a fund, right, where they would put in, and the number we were just kicking around, just whether it would be this much or not, is $1 million a year. and then that money would be, in both towns would have some kind of mechanism, and then we would come forth and say, this year, this is what we want to do, A, B, C, D, to use that money to keep Minnetonka alive and vibrant. But they had suggested to us before, which we brought up at the last meeting, was to have a consultant come in here and look at the numbers that John and Aaron's team have put together, and to see where they fit, work on a schedule over, let's say, the next 10 years, plus other things that maybe they know about that we don't even know about, right? And they were a little bit upset with the committee because we did not pass that. And they made it very clear to us that if we want their support in pursuing this fund, a town-level Minnetonka stabilization fund controlled by the taxpayers, that we would need to have this consultant come in and look at it. So as part of that, I wanted to make a motion and seek support from the committee members here to at this point have John and Aaron put forth a request out to the communities for different quotes or what the costs would be to come up with 2 different evaluations. The first evaluation is just on regular construction of this building, and the second evaluation would be on the technical IT needs of this building, having this 2 separate. What we found in the community is that they are 2 distinct, different groups that perform these audits. So, and if they will get those, they will come back to the committee, show us what they found, and then we can decide to vote there and then whether we want to accept any of them or not. But at least let us get the information, because I cannot overstress how much the representatives from the towns told us that it would be necessary for us to move forward with this. And they wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward unless we did do this. Case in point, Wilbraham just did this a few years ago. Every single one of the town buildings they had looked at, just so that they could prove what they had, known themselves with professional guidance. Aaron, did you want to add?
Sure. So the typical way to do this would be for the committee to authorize a not to exceed amount. So we would be looking for, I think I shared, we had one person estimate for us somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to do the building envelope and physical plant. That's the HVAC, the roof, all of the doors and windows. So for that, I would suggest that the committee consider a not to exceed amount of $35,000. That brings us right up to the bid limit, so we could go out and get 3 quotes without engaging in a formal bid. The other component would be the IT component. I did get a response today from the gentleman that Sean recommended, and he gave me a not to exceed amount of about $22,000. So we'd be looking for $22,000 as a not to exceed for the IT piece, and $35,000, and then we would go out and secure bids or quotes. They're not formal quotes, and we would typically go with the lowest responsible bidder.
Yeah, I think that's one option where we just give them the authority to, as long as it's under those amounts, go for it. Or we could ask them to get quotes and come back to us and, adding another layer to say, okay, we will accept this. I think the one that Aaron presented, I think that option is far better.
From a credibility standpoint, it's important to have a source of funds. So if we go out and we don't have a source of funds and we later have to pull the bids, it looks bad with our vendors. We develop relationships with vendors, so it's important that we have the credibility of at least having amounts out there.
Sorry, I got here late, my apologies, I just wanted to catch up. So The discussion we're having is just for this building here. It's not for any of the other school buildings. First of all, so every year we face headwinds from finance committee. Has the finance committee weighed in on this? And what was their recommendation? Was the recommendation to move ahead? I haven't talked to anybody today.
Both Doug Boyd and Mark Ducey said that for them to, work on this project of creating town-level stabilization funds for Minichog, and the numbers they're batting around now are up to $1 million a year to keep this building sustainable. They felt that it would be imperative, and they wouldn't be able to support it without someone professional looking at the information that we already have, and probably, adding things that we maybe even haven't thought about to those lists.
So they specifically mentioned an outside consultant.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just wondering, the only reason I'm wondering is because, so Doug and Mark are individual members. If we were going to do this, my recommendation would be to, well, first of all, we start by asking, where's the money coming from?
So I think last time it would have to come from the capital stabilization fund.
Okay. And I think that given that the recommendation came from Doug and Mark, I'd want to make sure that both finance and advisory, as bodies, were attuned to this. I talked to somebody from finance Tuesday night, no, last night. No, last night I can't remember. It's been such a crazy week, but
Last night we met, so it was probably Tuesday.
yeah. So, but I don't know if they had a discussion about that particular topic. So, yeah. So if they met last night, I would say that if we did that, I think it would be fine to go out and get a proposal. I want to make sure that it doesn't come back to bite us, where they turn around and then we're facing headwinds for this year's budget, which we know is going to be tight, and then we've got how much.
If I'm not incorrect, it did come up somewhat briefly, and the members there did seem to indicate that this would be an appropriate use for the Minichog Capitalization Fund at Wilbraham Finance.
So I would say that if we got the proposals, I would favor just getting the proposals and then making sure that they are both in agreement for the amount of money. I would hate to have them come back and say,
Right. And
we didn't know it was going to cost that much.
Right.
Otherwise we never would have approved it.
And we can by all means still bring the quotes we get to the committee. It's just typical to have an identified source of funds. You recall we went out for the equity audit, right? We had an identified source of funds for that. We used ESSER funds for that. And even when it went over, I came back and said we can still do it under ESSER. So we just want to have an identified source of funds, so we're not doing it in a disingenuous manner.
Right. At the meeting, budget and finance meeting, we did, I believe we were batting around 30 and 30. So right now it's 35 and 22. So it's even less than the numbers that that they were totally in agreement with. Actually, Doug Boyd was emphatic about, to the point where it's like, well, listen, if you don't want to take out our stabilization, we'll figure it out. We've got to get this done because we got to get this to happen. So
You looked a little confused. You might have missed earlier, Bill, we're talking about two separate consultants, one for IT, one for instruction. You made a little face
Yeah,
difference.
I read the email that John sent.
Okay.
I love John's summaries in the beginning there, because it really does help kind of clarify what the discussion will be. How much is in the stabilization fund now?
450,000, give or take.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was 200 something myself.
Well, I think it was about 300 and change when I started, and it's been 3 years since I've started, so we put 50 a year in, so about 450. Yeah.
I guess so. Can I have a motion to solicit quotes from consultants to assess the capital needs of Minichog Regional High School? The fiscal plant has one quote not to exceed 35, and the technology not to exceed 22.
Second.
No, I need a movement. You moved?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Bring it to discussion.
Do you have a second?
provides an advisory before moving forward.
Any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Anything else? Finance? Sean, do you want to add?
I just gotta say, you know, we've been spending the time on finance, really building relationships with both towns, having these conversations, and rather than having Aaron come up with, you know, okay, let's take this year's budget and slam it and call it next year's and then start from there, we're really doing the groundwork so that when we have real numbers, we'll be ready to roll with it. I'm very positive with the relationships.
So during your discussions, 'cause I know at the last meeting, we talked about having consultants come in and look at capital needs for all of the buildings. Was there a discussion at all with the representatives in finance and advisory with regards to completing that? I know Wilbraham had done their building assessment sometime, I want to say it was 2019, it was pre-COVID. I don't think Hamden had ever done anything. But just curious as to if there was any discussions about, was there any further discussion about that?
There was no discussion, but I want to say that it might have
The sheets Aaron
comments
gave,
that
yeah,
says maybe we should look at all the buildings, but there was no true discussion. We were only focusing on the high school area.
they would have to be different. If there's a fund, there needs to be one for the high school, and if there need to be one, that's up to each town, because Wilbraham, yeah, they're town-owned buildings. Aaron did give up the sheets for the capital projections for the next, 10, 15 years for every single school in the district. And there was some conversations, but the main focus right now they want to focus on is this Minnetonka piece, because it's coming to the point where Minnetonka, is 11, 12 years old, right? And we really need to not have a repeat, right? Not have a repeat of what happened with the last Minnetonka.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you,
will move
Michelle.
on to the LPBEC collaborative representative, Lisa.
We met yesterday and we had a presentation from Ms. Lightfoot, our coordinator of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. She just introduced the DEIB office, explained initiatives of the office as well as some that will be coming up. General discussion about needing to hire bus drivers, still in need of bus drivers, and LPBEC just received a cell phone grant for pouches, so they'll be locking up their cell phones, the students' cell phones, and getting vape detectors.
Any questions for Lisa?
You said getting vape detectors,
Yep.
how much do they cost?
I don't know, it was a grant.
I'm just curious.
Okay, thank you. So there's nothing for negotiations at this time. We'll move on to the policy subcommittee. Mike?
Yes, the policy subcommittee met and we reorganized. This is the first reading. There were 9 policies, and this is all based on MASC and administration recommendations due to law changes. There were 9 policies selected to be put up for elimination. Those are CHA, development of procedures; CHC, procedures, dissemination; CHCA-E, approval of handbooks and directives; CL, administrative reports; GA, personnel policies, goals; GCQE, retirement of professional staff members; GDQC, retirement of support staff members; GDQD, suspension and dismissal of support staff members; KCD, community involvement in decision-making. There was also 2 new policies that were elected to be put forward to be adopted. Once again, the first reading for these, DJ-I, Regional School District Purchasing, DJA-I, Regional School District Purchasing Authority.
This doesn't have to be a motion or anything yet, this is just the first reading.
I believe we're required to read them 3 times
Yes,
before there could be.
but just, yeah, they're in here, we don't have to physically actually read them.
Right.
Okay, great. Do you have a date for your next meeting?
11/13.
Okay, thank you. In the conference room, right?
Correct.
At what time?
6:30. What is it, 6:30? Next, policy.
Yeah.
6 or 6:30.
I thought it was 6.
Stand
Is
by.
it easier for you to get to 6:30?
Well, you know me, later's better.
Why don't we just do it at 6:30 then?
I have no problems with being 6:30. So November 13th, I have 6 here, but we can switch it to 6:30.
That was a Monday night. No, just keep it at 6, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So November 13th, 6 o'clock, district conference room. That's policy meeting. Great. Technology subcommittee, Bill?
Nope.
Okay, great. We'll move on to the consent agenda.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Move on to the superintendent's update.
Thanks very much. I'll just wait for the technology for a minute.
Please hold.
Can I'll also thank Gina for sharing the modular sharing program. So Gina got that to me, so I no longer need that to be donated by anyone else. Okay, so I'd like to begin my report by sharing a few of the great moments that I was privileged to be a part of in the past 2 weeks. Starting at the bottom of this collage, I'm happy to share that I earned my second pride pin, and this one involves something that was a lot more important than a dunk tank. Mr. DeLessio nominated me for participating with members of the Above the Influence Club in wearing blue for the World Day of Bullying Prevention. He did this to thank me for supporting his students' efforts to combat bullying, but I have to tell you that when I walked into his classroom, which you can see pictured there, and saw just a complete sea of students with blue shirts and signs they had created to combat bullying, I felt like I was the one being supported by them. And I also have a wardrobe consultant group now. So his Above the Influence students are the ones who were in charge of that activity. And they told me to be sure to wear purple today for Domestic Abuse Awareness Day. So if we bring the sartorial level of my performance to a higher degree, it's all because of his students. And then last Friday, we had a double header of inspiration for our students. You've all heard about the class of '73 and their famous classmate, Dr. Janice Voss. Last Friday, her crewmate, Dr. Bernard Harris, who was an MD, a flight surgeon, and an astronaut, as well as the founder of the Harris Foundation, which is a Houston, Texas-based nonprofit organization that supports programs for empowering individuals, particularly those who are economically or socially disadvantaged, was right across the hall in our auditorium talking to our students. Also, first African American to conduct a spacewalk. He was right there. He was talking with our kids. It was really amazing. He really encouraged them to pursue their dreams. Spoke to them about what Dr. Voss had done, how she had pursued her dreams in spite of some of the disadvantages that she had faced, how he pursued his dreams in spite of the disadvantages he faced, and his real message to them was, you can do whatever you want. Earlier that same day, you may have seen on the news, Hamden District Attorney Galani visited Wilbraham Middle School He's adopted the 8th grade for this year. It was sort of like the humanities side of the day, because he shared with the students that he wasn't particularly good at math and science, and so he decided to pursue the law. He shared with them information about his career and many opportunities within the field of criminal justice. He also encouraged them to consider getting involved with his Future Lawyers of Springfield program, which is an initiative that he's created to help diversify the legal community in our area. And earlier this week, Xiomara De Lobato, who is Chief of Staff for the Western Mass Economic Development Council, kicked off our speaker series sponsored by the SOCA Club with a talk on our efforts to foster economic and educational equity in our region. So really just a lot of things being done in the district to help students see a broader horizon. I wanted to share that before getting into my talk about MTSS. So
I would like to say quickly, Xiomara used to be a neighbor of mine, and she kept her family in Wilbraham, her growing family, and she is amazing. So I was very happy when I saw that poster walking by one day in school that she was speaking. That's great.
So moving on to MTSS, in your materials, you'll find a document entitled MTS 1.0 and Catalog of Aligned Supports. I'm pleased to present this resource to the school community tonight. For several months, I've hinted that this would be coming, and it represents the culmination of many months of work by many staff at all levels of our district. I've named this MTSS 1.0 to signify this is our first attempt to provide a multi-tiered system of supports. We believe in multiple iterations, so this is our first version, not our last or our best, but it's certainly a marked step forward from the status quo. So the next slide is from the second page of that resource. One of the theories of action from the strategic plan reads, if the district provides a multi-tiered system of support in the academic and social-emotional realms for all students, delivers ongoing targeted professional development to staff, and establishes a collaborative relationship with families, then all students will have access to equitable opportunities to achieve personal and academic success. The establishment of a multi-tiered system of support appears as a strategy in both the first and second domains of the strategic plan, making it central to the work on curriculum, as well as our work to improve school climate and culture. And I would add it now is also a very important strand running through our equity improvement plan. So this is really a triple hitter here. At this point, I imagine some people may be asking exactly what I mean by a multi-tiered system of support. One of the definitions that I actually find most helpful comes from a piece of federal legislation known as the Every Child Succeeds Act of 2015, which defines MTSS as a, quote, comprehensive continuum of evidence-based systematic practices to support a rapid response to students' needs with a regular observation to facilitate data-based instructional decision-making. I understand that's a little jargoning, so I've also included a culinary analogy in the workbook in the hopes that this may make the concept a little bit more accessible. And so at this time, I want to just allow that analogy to play.
Right now, I'm enjoying the best chocolate cake. And the thing about this chocolate cake that makes it so wonderful is the multi-layers of chocolatey goodness. So let me tell you how this cake is very similar to a multi-tiered system of support. When we talk about creating a continuum of support for learners, I want to make one thing really clear, okay? If I had a cake right now, I would frost it to say, supplement, not supplant. Because if I'm ordering a layer cake, I don't just want the second layer or the third layer. There's no point in ordering a layer cake if I can't have all of the layers. And in our classrooms today, we need to make sure that instruction in Tier 1 grade level classrooms. That is the bottom, that is the foundation for the cake. And some students, we recognize, will need more than that to be successful. And that is a beautiful part of variability. And so we want to layer on the services that students need. So all of our students are general education students first. And some students benefit from special education services or behavioral support or support socially and emotionally. And we have to make sure that we create a system that supports these layers and ensures that students get more and not instead of. Too often we think about tiers as locations. We use language like Tier 2 students or special education students as though they belong somewhere different. If we are to create inclusive and equitable classrooms, everyone needs that bottom layer of support. And when they need it, we have to build systems that ensure that every single learner gets what they need academically, behaviorally, and socially and emotionally. Now to do this, we have to zoom out and recognize the importance of building teacher competency, of making sure that we have robust implementation drivers like curriculum and scheduling and technology. And also this requires incredible instructional leadership and family and community engagement. But with all those ingredients, we can make a beautiful layer cake that truly honors all of our students. And you know what? I want you to think about that the next time we have a piece of cake.
So that may be an easier way to think about it, and maybe we'll never look at layer cake the same way again. Moving from that analogy to a visual representation, trying to move from that to the visual representation, let me share what's known in the field as the intervention diamond. Although some of my first grade teachers pointed out last week that we should really call this the intervention rhombus. And I think they're correct, but we're going to call it a diamond anyways. What this attempts to show is that in any area of skill development, whether the skills are related to language and literacy, mathematics, social and behavioral skills, or even motor skills, there's a wide range of typical development. Well-designed and implemented Tier 1 instruction should be effective for students along the whole range of typical development. As we heard in the cake analogy, every student should participate in Tier 1. But some students will need more. If you think of students who may be considered to be at risk for learning problems, which are shown on the left side of this diagram, there will be some who need targeted remediation or support to build the skills they need to succeed in the core curriculum. For students in even greater risk, there's a need for intensive support. This can be the domain of special education services. And on the right side of the diagram, there are students who could be considered ready for more. They are also Tier 1 students because they need to be exposed to the core content in order to maintain the mastery of standards that are expected at grade levels. But they may do so more quickly than their peers, and they may require additional challenge in order to remain engaged and in order to remain interested in school. The goal for them is to ensure that school remains challenging and motivating while they continue to receive Tier 1 instruction. So that's the whole pyramid. We have everyone in the middle receiving Tier 1 support. We have some students who may be at risk getting the help they need to make sure the risk doesn't progress to learning problems. We have some students who are ready for more, getting enrichment and extension they need, making sure that they remain challenged and engaged in school. So, universal screening is the engine of MTSS. In addition to monitoring the progress of students, it provides a fair and objective way to identify those who may benefit from remediation or extensions. This is an example of the results of a universal screening measure known as the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, or DIBELS, that was administered this fall. This report happens to show grade 5 students from Sewell Road. In grade 5, we assess reading accuracy, reading fluency, and reading comprehension to obtain a composite measure of student reading achievement. The red, yellow, green, and blue bands represent students who are far below, below, at, or above benchmark, respectively. Results such as these are used to identify students who are making typical progress with only Tier 1, as well as those who may require Tier 2 or Tier 3, either to remediate a weakness or to provide additional challenges. And this is an example of a universal screening measure in mathematics. This is from Fastbridge, and it uses a similar color coding system to identify students who are below, at, or above grade level expectations. And this is, again, our fall scores. To give you a sense of the size of the population we're trying to help, we've identified more than 375 students who are attempting to provide Tier 2 interventions to in English language arts, including about 130 who are trying to provide extension or enrichment activities for. In math, as we'll discuss, we are implementing a system that provides every student in grades K through 7 the opportunity to have an individualized pathway, including many that are receiving remediation, as well as some that are receiving enrichment through that pathway. In Minnetonka, there are currently more than 100 students enrolled in classes that are listed in this MTSS guide as an example of high-level math classes. We're also providing Tier 3 services to 475 students. And that's something we hope to see shift over time. If you have your Tier 3 larger than your Tier 2, something's out of whack. The reason it is that way now, I would suspect, is because there has been no real Tier 2 system, and so everyone needing support has gone to special education. So we hope to see those numbers shift over time. In our MTSS 1.0 plan, we seek to provide a continuum of services along 3 dimensions of learning. The first is literacy. Literacy is a complex of discrete skills. I've listed here what are commonly known as the 5 components of reading. As you saw on the last couple of slides, we assess each of the skills that contribute to literacy development. We do this because students can have both strengths and weaknesses within sub-skills of reading. And so a student may need remediation in one area of reading, but may be able to be stretched in another area of reading. And so the more finely we can understand their developmental profile, the better we can meet their learning profile. The second dimension of our MTSS model is numeracy. Numeracy is also a complex of skills, and although there may be more numeracy skills, and although the field may not have reached consensus on all the components of numeracy, I think it's fair to say that they include such things as number sense, the ability to recognize patterns and function, the ability to represent numerical information, measurement, the ability to recognize shapes, and possibly others. The third MTSS dimension is social and emotional skills, which include things such as self-awareness, self-management or self-regulation, responsible or constructive decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. The whole MTSS document is organized into those 3 dimensions, which I just discussed. Within each dimension, the supports are organized by tier. This is a page from the section on social and emotional supports of our system. For each type of support, you'll find its name, the type of support, which is the same as the dimension it belongs to, its tier, the student population it's intended to support, a brief description about what it is, and a link you can click on for more information. The supports are color-coded to match the color coding of the MTSS diamond or rhombus. In this case, group counseling is shaded in a blended color to demonstrate that it can be considered Tier 2 or Tier 3, depending on the circumstances and the therapeutic goals of the counseling. You'll recall from the video that family engagement and communication is another important ingredient in the multi-tiered cake. These are excerpts from letters that went home to Mile Tree and Green Meadows families the day after our last meeting. There are also letters from other schools. These are just examples. This cover letter is accompanied by screening results for the families showing where the individual students are with respect to the different universal screening measures and the types of support they'll be receiving based on their assessment data. So, you might be wondering how it's possible to provide students with such targeted support when there's so many different learning needs in each classroom. This is a very simplified diagram that attempts to show you how this can be done with regrouping. In fact, how it is being done with regrouping. And so what you see at the top are your core classes, so you can think of this as a bunch of first grade classrooms. Each of the circles represents a teacher, and the students in the class are color-coded to indicate that they're all members of the same class. And below the line, you see what happens during what's known as our WINS block. We have a half an hour in the morning that's dedicated to supporting students in English language arts, and we have another half an hour later in the day that's devoted to helping students with mathematics. As you can see here, when we're talking about first grade, there are a lot more sub-skills of reading that we're working on. And so what happens during that block is each teacher becomes responsible not for a classroom of students teaching the core curriculum, but a component of reading in a specific intervention designed to help that. And students from all the classes who need that go to that teacher. So you can see here, for example, we have 2 groups for letter sounds. That's a big need in the first grade right now. There are 2 groups working on word decoding. Some other things that I'll point out is you may notice that there are more groups when we get to the WINS block, and I'm wondering where the extra group comes from. That's because when we go into tier 2, it's all hands on deck. There are actually 9 groups. 7 becomes 9 because the PE teacher is taking a group and a paraprofessional is taking a group. You might also notice that there are different sizes of groups. You could think of the reading comprehension group here as the group who's getting exposed to more advanced learning. Reading comprehension is the highest level of reading at this level, and so those students are being exposed to higher level texts. And because of their skills, we think they can be in a slightly larger group, which allows us to have slightly smaller groups for the other places where we're providing more intensive instruction on some of the sub-skills within reading. So that's one way of accomplishing MTSS, and as I said, that is underway in our district. First intervention cycle started last week. Something else that I want to point out about this is this should help us reduce bias in special education referrals. Instead of relying solely upon teacher, caregiver, or agency referrals for our child find process, we can use the results of this process to identify so-called non-responders who don't make satisfactory progress despite having evidence-based core instruction and an evidence-based remediation program specifically targeted to their learning needs. And this can help with the problem of disproportionality, which has plagued special education since its inception. It's well known that the population of students identified as having disabilities skews heavily towards male students. In fact, about twice as many male students in special education as female students. And this happens despite the fact that, with the exception of some exceedingly rare genetic disorders that we know are carried on the Y chromosome, we expect that ability is normally distributed among all humans. Now there's some debate about whether this represents staff over-referring male students or under-referring female students or some combination of the two. But what can't be debated is that bias is at the core in some way. And an MTSS system gives you a way to take bias out by saying, let the system refer kids. When students are being considered for special education, they should have screening results that indicate they have some weaknesses, and they should have an opportunity to receive Tier 2 supports, progress monitored within that before being considered as a potential student with a disability.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are children who are ESL put in this system, or are they take out?
They're put in. To go back to what she said about the cake, it's layers on top of, it's more, not instead of. Okay, so that is one way of doing it. Another way to match Tier 2 work to students' individual needs is through the use of adaptive software. In our district, the most noteworthy example of that is the use of Imagine Math this year. Above, you see portions of 3 Tier 2 learning pathways for students. Although there's no personally identifiable information on the pathways, I'll tell you they're real pathways in our district. You can see that 1 is for a 5th grader and 2 are for 7th graders. Let me start by pointing out some of the things about the pathway on the far right. On this pathway, you can see that the student demonstrated mastery of direct variation, which is a 7th grade skill. The program then brought the student to lessons on interpreting unit rates on graphs, which is another 7th grade skill. But this time the student was not successful. So the program brought the student back to a unit, to review a unit on exploring rates and graphs, which is a 6th grade skill. Once the student showed mastery on that content, the student went back to interpreting unit rates on graphs. This time the student was able to master the content. So the student went on to complete several more 7th grade topics until he ran into trouble with proportions and scale drawings. Just like before, the program will give the student an opportunity to review some prerequisite content and then give them another chance to complete 7th grade work. So now, I'd like to ask you to look at the other 2 pathways, and this is the quiz part of the evening. Tell me if you notice any similarities between the 2. To give you a hint, look at the lesson titles.
I'll be honest with you, I don't have reading glasses. I can't. I mean,
Sorry.
I see there are words there, but they're really small.
Okay, I feel like I should just demonstrate wait time, so I'm going to do that.
In 7th grade, so it's spiraling through the grades. It's building upon.
It's building upon and spiraling through the grades. So says Lisa.
That is a great observation, Sean.
I did quote Lisa.
Another thing I'd like to point out is if you look at the lesson titles, there's some of the same content the 5th grader is taking and the 7th grader is taking the same content. So here you have a 5th grader who may be ready for more, who's already being exposed to 6th grade content and mastering 6th grade content, and you have a 7th grader who may need some remediation, who's being brought back to the 6th grade content. So this is a way, again, to challenge students who need more while providing an opportunity for remediation for students who may have some gaps in their prior learning. So this is run by the software rather than run by humans, as we saw in the first example. But it's another way of fine-tuning and honing student practice to what students really need after they have their Tier 1 instruction. So all the students are receiving the same Tier 1 instruction, because in the past, one of the ways districts have tried to address kids who might be ready for more is just by skipping grades, which really turns out to be bad because even if they know a lot, they usually don't know everything that's in that grade level, and so they end up with gaps that end up biting them later on. Here, all of the students are Tier 1 students, as we heard. but some of them have the opportunity to get more challenge when they need it. Others have the opportunity to get more review when they need it, and some of them are just motoring along right on skills that are aligned with their current grade placement. And through the Imagine Math platform, students can receive individualized texting support with a licensed teacher until 9:30 p.m. on most school nights and on Saturday mornings. The average wait time for a student to be connected to a teacher is 30 seconds. As you can see from this graph, which appears in my inbox every Monday morning, you can see that our students are figuring that system out, and they are reaching out more and more to those teachers. This is at home, this is during homework time, when they encounter a problem that they don't know how to do and they need some support. It's right there for them. The teachers are obviously all familiar with the program and have, very clear prompting strategies to use with the students to try to guide them through the lessons in a way that helps them develop the skills they need so that they're not relying on the teachers all the time. And so, I want you to keep that notion of time in your mind. I want to close by revisiting this nearly 30-year-old quote from the National Commission on Time and Learning. This was from the heady early days of education reform. This is when I was getting into the business. And the statement here, the problem that we're trying to fix was, for the past 150 years, American public schools have held time constant and let learning vary. The rule, only rarely voiced, was simple: learn what you can in the time we make available. We really wanted to flip that. We wanted to say, well, let's hold learning constant and let time vary, knowing that some kids would get it faster and other kids would need more time. But we wanted all kids to get to that place. We said we want high standards, but if we're really going to do this thing, we need to have some flexibility around the time variable. Well, we got half of what we wanted. Now all students are held to high standards, but we didn't get the additional time. As usual, the reason is lack of funding. Instead of learn what you can in the time we make available, we wanted the rule to be, this is what you need to learn and we'll make sure you have the time you need to get there. But what we have now is, this is what you need to learn, and you have to learn it at the same time as everybody else, despite the fact that you all learn at different rates and you all started at different places. This came home to me while I was attending an MTSS meeting in one of our schools. There were 2 grades there, and they met in first one grade, then the next grade. So in the first grade, I heard teachers saying, if only we had more time in the day. These intervention cycles are going to be so powerful, but we only get to do 2, and we know there are a lot of kids who need intervention groups. If we had another half an hour, we could get another intervention cycle in. Which I thought was interesting. That group left, and then the next group of teachers came in and they said, if we only had more days in the year. They said, we can do about 3 intervention cycles in a year, but that might not get all the kids that we want to get an intervention to. We're running out of time. And then earlier this week, I attended a statewide conference on Project Lead the Way. The theme of the day was time, because the #1 issue identified by 75% of the teachers implementing Project Lead the Way is we don't have enough time to get through all the content. And so, I bring it up because with methods such as MTSS, we can do a lot to accelerate growth trajectories so that students can learn more in the time we have available. But at some point, if we keep expanding the curriculum and raising standards, I think we're going to have to make more learning time available. Maybe technologies such as Imagine Math will provide an answer. When you hear me say that students have teacher support available till 9:30 every night and on Saturday mornings, really what I'm saying is that is one way of extending the learning time available to kids. But maybe we could use more. Anyways, that is my report on MTS 1.0. I think it's going to be a great thing for kids. As I said, future iterations of this will be better. You know, you can find places where it's thinner and other places where it's more robust. But I do think we're on a good path to doing a lot of meaningful, important, life-changing work with kids with this system.
Awesome presentation, John, thanks. The question that was kind of rolling through my mind as I was watching this is sort of what benchmarks are you going to be using to look at the results of this? And how frequently are you going to be doing that?
So when students are in an intervention, they go into more, well, let me start with the student progress monitoring. I'm sorry, universal screening. Universal screening is 3 times a year. So we look at fall, or what's sometimes known as beginning of year, mid-year, and end of year. And we're looking to see shifts in the number of students who are in each of those areas. So we saw red, yellow, green, blue. Over the course of the year, we'd want to see the same group of students shift from the red end of the spectrum up to the green and blue end of the spectrum. So that's one way. And then while looking at individuals who are involved in an intervention cycle, what we do for that is we increase progress monitoring of the skill we're trying to build. So we look at that on a more frequent basis to see if that individual student is making progress on the thing that we're trying to improve for that student. So you can look at that just in terms of the system within that, but in sort of a more global sense, this should lead to greater student achievement overall. So we should see that reflected in our MCAS results. And as I mentioned, it should lead to a shifting of where students are receiving services. Should be more students receiving services in Tier 1 and Tier 2, and fewer students receiving services in Tier 3.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Comments? Thank you very much.
Nice job, John. Thank you.
All right, so
Thank you, John.
moving on to future agenda items. One item that I'll be adding is the MASC resolutions that we're reviewing in the next meeting. Is there anything else anyone would like to add?
Yes, I was talking to the parent of a student and a student, and I started asking around, and from what I hear, it can take about 15 minutes to go through the lunch line at Minichog. And with the issues that we're going to be having with lunches and stuff, I thought maybe now is a prudent time for us to look at maybe adding a couple more cashiers to make things go faster, or whatever it is that we can do to move that so that people aren't waiting in line more than 5 minutes. Gives them more time to eat and to socialize, which is an important part of high school, I believe, and especially considering that the 8th grade will be moving up here. I think it's something that we need to look at, the time the students are in line and what we can do to expedite that. So I don't know what we have to do from our side, but maybe have Julie come in and talk to us about, you know, what the issue is and if there's any resources that we can provide her to help make that quicker. It sounds like, you know, 15 minutes is significant. If we knock that down to 5 minutes, 10 extra minutes, I think it's critical.
Okay, we'll put that on next time. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Just looking at the year-long agenda items, MCAS review,
We'll have that in
November.
next month, yeah.
Okay. School resource officer appointment, we've already, it's done.
It's all set.
Superintendent goals,
That's gonna also be, we had discussed that, that will also be in November, we have that on me, just because of, yeah,
that's it, okay.
thank you. Okay. We do have a need for executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, C, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 3, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, A. Osborne. Executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, C, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body in the Chair's Affairs, Student Services Office reorganization, clerical unit.
You will be adjourning from executive session.
Correct.
Make a motion to adjourn the executive session.
Second.
Okay, so we'll do roll call vote. Bill Vincent.
Yes.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Sean.
Aye.
Lisa.
Yes.
Mike.
Yeah.
And Michelle. Aye. So we're moving to executive session.
Stay here, or are we going in the other room?